Opening prayer. Okay,
Thank you.
This will be our first test.
Oh,
If he's muted, is this going to come through?
yes, I'm gonna mute this now so he can play that.
Okay.
Welcome back again to the sixth and now the final episode of Earthbound. In the 5 previous sessions, we examined some obstacles to engaging fully our call to care for the earth. We have misread certain Bible passages. We have been held captive by distorted notions of individualism stemming from the Enlightenment that have kept us from caring for the common good. We have lived in the moment, a kind of short-term thinking with little regard for future generations. We have been attached to visions of a celestial heaven at the expense of our earthly home.
In this session, we will explore our understanding of the abundant life. God provides abundantly through the riches of this good earth. Animals, fruits, herbs, vegetables, nuts, grains, wood, metals, and minerals, all provided by creation for a life of fullness. However, we seem unable to control our consumption, widening the gulf between those who have and those who don't, and taxing the capacity of the earth to support life as we have known it.
At the time of Jesus, 2,000 years ago, the entire human population of Earth is estimated to have been around 200 million. By 1900, the population had grown to 1.6 billion. And in the mere 100 years since, the population has soared exponentially to 6.1 billion people. Many experts predict that by 2050, the human population may reach 9 billion. This astonishing growth in such a short period of time is putting incredible stress on
I am
Earth.
accepted. This is a
Add
movie.
to that
these
stress our modern mechanized production methods and our unprecedented levels of consumption, especially in the developed world. Our challenge is to make sure everyone is fed without, at the same time, overtaxing the earth.
The total number of goods and services produced
by this population since 1950 is greater than all of the goods and services produced by human beings up to 1950. So put those two together, number of individuals and then the power that individuals have as producers and consumers, and you have some idea of the cumulative human power.
When we read the Bible, we often hear God calling us to trust that God will provide abundantly what we need. So why shouldn't we believe that God wants us to have prosperity in abundance?
The scriptural and biblical tradition talks a lot about abundance, but it's abundance not in the consumerist sense, but it's abundance in the sense of a fullness of having things when one's in community with each other. And so in order to work in community between human beings and nature, then it seems to me the vision we need to have is the distinction between mining the world, taking things out of the world that can't be replaced or can only be replaced through millions and millions and millions of years, such as oil, or working with created order in such a way as to work with things that can be recreated and sustained. So the movement needs to be in the direction of a sense of our limits, but then also a sense of our working with the creation, to work in rhythm with it rather than to simply take out from the earth what's been deposited and can't be replaced easily.
God in Christ has secured our future. We can rest in the assurance that all we need is available to us. Isn't that the beginning of understanding true abundance?
An understanding of justification does, in a sense, provide a certain security, not only an internal sense of security, but that you will be provided for. You know, Luther in his small catechism, in his explanation of the first article, says, God has created me and everything that exists. He has given me and still preserves my body and soul and all their powers. He provides me with food and clothing, home and family, daily work, and all that I need from day to day. And of course, it gets echoed later than in the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. There's a sense in which we are always forever looking beyond this day and securing the future, and that usually means spending too much.
When you think, for example, of Amos's familiar oracle against the cows of Bashan, who are always pressing their husbands to produce more and to bring more, and Amos has an oracle about drinking wine from huge bowls and all kinds of self-indulgence, and then the prophets always introduce a therefore oracle into that. Therefore, these are the consequences that are going to come from that, and they are inescapable consequences. So I always tell my students when I'm working with the prophets that this stuff sounds like it was written yesterday. It's really about our crisis.
All of this belongs to God, and we don't own anything. I like what the psalmist says, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, you know.
We are to love God and trust God for all things. So when we find ourselves in need, do we just expect a miracle? How does God provide?
One can be Christian, profoundly faithful, praying to God, and starve to death. So we're not assured that God is automatically going to provide material needs. For that, God depends upon human beings.
You may know this story, but I can't resist it. The story of the man who was given a chance to go visit hell, and he walked into the room in hell, and there was people with arms that were so stiff that they couldn't bend, all of whom were sitting next to a table which was just loaded with food. And he got to the door and he talked to God and said, well, I can really understand why this is hell. I mean, sitting there with arms like this and all of this food in front of a person. And then he went to heaven, and lo and behold, heaven, people had the same arms and the same tables full of food, but in heaven, people were taking the food and feeding each other with their stiff arms. They couldn't feed themselves, but they could feed each other. And if we had some image of being able to work together for mutual benefit with the creation as well as with each other, that would be an image of shalom, I would think.
Mahatma Gandhi said, "Earth provides enough to satisfy everyone's need, but not everyone's greed." How do we know when what we have is enough?
We were given dominion. We were asked to be caretakers, good stewards of what God has given us in order for us to have abundant life. In forgetting that and only stressing what I need, we have started to take more than we need, use more than we need, contaminate more than we need, because we forget that there are others that need to be fed. What would it look like if we thought of, so that none may go away hungry?
If you're poor and fighting for survival, you have to have more in order to be more. And we have lots of sociological studies that show that while there's a positive correlation between having more and being fulfilled until basic human needs are met, after that point there is no positive correlation. What's scary right now is that at a certain point you reach a negative correlation between greater consumption and levels of happiness, that happiness is actually a decline.
We say in Spanish, lo poco divierte y lo mucho enfada, which means a little bit of everything, enough is good, but too much dissatisfies, sickens.
Now the reason for that is that the most fundamental human need is for strong social bonds in committed relationships. And our kind of consumerism is pulling communities apart. They're not intact communities. So we move all around for jobs. Families don't live in the same place for generation after generation. So the social bonds are coming apart.
We need to listen to this because this is something the church can help with. As people try to find meaning and purpose in their lives now, the church can say the message that Jesus has been telling us all along, which is that happiness does not consist in the abundance of possessions.
Times of economic crisis provide many lessons about what makes for an abundant life. When our trust in our investments is dimmed, when our financial security is shaken, we have to look for what really matters.
We're asked, forced maybe even, to get down to some basics here and say, who are we? What are we about? What is truly our responsibility in this world of which we are a part? Have we been too focused on ourselves, too focused on the building of wealth?
In a place like Metro Detroit, where so many people need to hear the word in a different way, particularly because the abundance that we are so used to is now falling through the cracks, and so many people are thinking that their lives are over. But some of them are realizing that I really didn't need all of this stuff in the first place. So the underbelly, so to speak, is ripe for a new theological understanding of who we are and what we're called to do and what we're called to do it with.
Christians believe that the material world is good and that God provides what we need through the activity of the larger community, including the non-human community. Humans have created a new religion that is a distortion of this reality. It's called consumerism, consumption as human culture. It makes the wheels of our economy turn, but at what cost? At what point must we reassess what we need versus what we want?
And it fits the classic definition of idolatry. We've made an idol out of consuming, and consumerism has become a religion for us. It's time for us to come out and not worship those gods anymore.
I think, of course, about the parable of the man who had so much stuff that he had to build a great big brand new barn, and then died that very night. And God asked him, now what's going to become of all that you have hoarded?
We know that God wants for us abundant life, and that means abundant in many ways. It means having our basic needs met, and it means having the things that enable us to relish and celebrate and just glory in life. Abundance does not mean having maximum amounts of stuff. The God that loves us wills and wants that we all have enough material stuff to meet our needs, but not that we have so much extra stuff that it keeps others from having, or that it takes us away from needing other people.
When faced with global problems, we often feel we lack the power to affect real change. Lake Park Lutheran Church in Milwaukee started talking about care for creation and how they might deal with these questions. What they discovered was an abundance of passion, talent, and energy within the congregation around these issues. But it started with some conflict.
We had a youth event with our Sunday school outside in the spring, and the day before, our wonderful lawn guy outside, who's just absolutely amazing, decided to put his normal course of fertilizer on that he'd done every year forever. And he put, because he was concerned about the kids, the big sign out front that said pesticide, on here, stay off for a little bit. One of our members came, and as she saw our kids run onto the lawn and saw this sort of poison sign, she, being wonderfully educated, care for creation, was like, oh my gosh, no, and was livid, mad, came storming into my office like, you can't let our kids play in poison. And as a pastor, you're really confronted with a dilemma. Do you tell her to be quiet? Do you join her passion and say, kick the lawn guy out and fire him? Or, do you equip someone to do something they're really passionate about? And obviously, the latter was there. We just said, let's start talking about it, educating people. Let's start a movement within the church.
That kind of imagination and attention to care for creation was deeply integrated into the life of the whole congregation.
The team, for lack of a better word, that we formed in it, they were not a committee on their own that implemented care for creation stuff in the church, like moving us from styrofoam to, mugs. They were a group that went and talked with various teams in the church about what they could do, and just to brainstorm and be creative about how they could play a part in caring for creation.
Having the year on internship has just been amazing to see what ministry is like and how it inspires people and how it can really play out in people's lives. And for Lake Park, the Care for Creation has been a prime example of how they live out their faith. It just is. It's one of those lessons that I've learned too, that there's Care for Creation, there's a ministry, a team, but that then is not just all they do. The Care for Creation team affects and plays a role in our hospitality, in our worship and music, and the way we talk about preaching and leadership and our counsel. I mean, it's a way of life, and so that's what they've been teaching here.
One idea was to turn the need for a new roof into an opportunity to generate sustainable electricity for the church using solar technology.
Well, the church is going to be 100 years old in 2011, and one of the things that we knew we needed to address was the roof. We believe we have the original slate on the roof, which is, again, 100 years old, and we, instead of just looking at it as something that we needed to do to preserve the structure here, we saw it as an opportunity to really, I guess, put our money where our mouth was and care for creation, and as part of that, look at pursuing solar energy.
Lutheran Volunteer Corps placed Eric Anderson at the Urban Ecology Center, an environmental education center in Milwaukee. The placement was the perfect framework for Eric's call to care for creation through his faith. Eric is also a member at Lake Park Lutheran Church.
I've had a lot of opportunity to think about how faith and environmental ethic really fit together for me. And though I'm an employee at an organization that is not religiously based, but I still find that it is in a way a ministry, and that my own faith very much influences what I do and why.
Milwaukee, like many urban centers, has very little green space, and the need for care for the environment is acute. The people of Lake Park Lutheran Church connected with Lutherans throughout the Greater Milwaukee Synod and beyond to address care of creation in the urban context. The impact of this collaboration is improving nutrition among the city's poor and reconnecting urban families with the earth.
I think in the city you're forced to come to terms constantly with your environment because it forces itself on you in such an overt way. And in so doing, you can see, I think, again, how deeply bound we are in every way to what's going on in our environment. You'll see this when you go to Alice's Garden.
Alice's Garden is an urban farm. You can call it a community garden, but you see by its size, this is a little more than a community garden. It's an urban farm. And as an organization that ministers to families and to children, we just thought it was real important to take that creation story and bring it to life in a way that is extremely meaningful for our families, to talk about being stewards of the land and stewards of creation and what it means to care for it as opposed to trample it, as opposed to seeing the land as something that belongs to us to do whatever it is that we want to do with. We have groups that come in almost every week, Lutheran groups from Illinois or Minnesota, Oregon, who come in and help us to care for the property, whether they're weeding or doing programs with us with kids. And locally, the Lutheran churches that are involved come, whether it's for Vacation Bible School, whether it is for a place to have a community cookout, whether it's to come and actually learn about urban ag, whether it's to come and just celebrate creation.
The city churches, especially city churches in deep poverty, have been forced to come to terms with the deep reality of what happens when you live in a community that cannot, because of so many societal reasons, take care of the terrain around it.
You know, unplugging our families is just so important to us, and unplugging them from the corner store that may not have and normally does not have all of the fresh stuff that you can provide for yourself. So part of our program, especially for our teens, we have a teen program called Garden Mosaics where they learn about food production. They learn about why they should not be eating fast food and convenience food. They develop a product. So this year our Garden Mosaics teens, well, I think they've decided to create a salsa. But they also grow flowers and corn and a bunch of other stuff that there's a farmer's market right down the street. And so they also grow at the local farmer's market. But our main intention is to get healthy food into homes and to understand that even here in the city, we can be farmers and be good at it.
In the midst of the challenge to change behaviors and systems, the people of the Greater Milwaukee Synod discovered a true abundance, imagination, shared values, commitment, and energy to live out their shared earthbound calling.
The other thing that it's done, especially in our synod, where we have a strong urban core and we also have a strong rural and suburban core, it's brought those two groups together in ways of sort of mutual sustenance and joy. We're bound together. And if we're bound together by the earth, and we realize that, it's wonderful.
The people of Milwaukee are discovering the true meaning of abundance. And it gives them courage to change behavior, not out of a sense of fear or obligation, but out of freedom and hope.
I think that as an act of neighbor love, as an act of faith, as a dimension of our faith, we're called to live, to change behaviors so that our lifestyles, so that they're more earth-honoring. And I think as an act of faith, we're called to address, challenge, and change the social structures that contribute to the wealth gap and the ecological devastation.
It's not that there isn't enough for all of God's people. The question is, how is it distributed? How do we understand what we need, what our limits are, how we engage in responsible living across the board. And over time, that is going to mean that those of us who live in the West and in the Northern Hemisphere are going to have to rethink the standard of living that we enjoy for the sake of making sure that people who live in the Southern Hemisphere have the resources that they need in order to live and to enjoy the abundant life that God intends for all God's people.
We've taken what is God's and decided that it's just for us.
So we think very pragmatically about changing the way we live economically as an act of discipleship, as an act of loving neighbor, is that no longer will we say if an economy grows, that's good, but we will put qualifications on that. And this I learned from working with the South African Council of Churches, where they talk about growth that is pro-earth, and growth that is pro-jobs, and growth that is pro-poor. We have all the knowledge and all the technology that we need, and it's there that I think the call of people of faith to live in ways that love neighbor can provide that kind of political will and moral spiritual power to shift the way we live on earth.
We are earthbound, and the fate of this earth will determine the fate of the human species. We are being told every day, as we lose a species of plant or animal every 20 minutes, that the way we are living is not sustainable. We have a vocation. Our earthbound calling as created co-creators with God to care for this earth, not as dominators, but as creatures who tend and care for this creation that we share. We live in a web of creation that is intricate and complex. We live in a rich community of life that is designed for mutual benefit. We understand our calling to think and act long-term for the well-being of future generations. And we honor and respect the material world God made as good and in which God dwells. We trust that all we need to live will be provided when we live in right relationship to land, animals, and people. God is calling you to use your gifts and your talents to be inventive, creative, and even playful in the joyful task of caring for God's good creation.
After all, we are earthbound. Blessings to you as you live out your earthbound calling with joy and grace.
Shalom.
Now you have to mute yourself.
Okay. Can you all hear us at those of you who are watching at home? Okay, good, good. All right. I think we're set up. We were having a few little glitches there at the beginning of the video, but it worked. So I guess I've got some questions kind of on a sheet here that we can talk about, but just to start with, what are some initial reactions as you watch this last one, this idea of enough, too much? How do we navigate that? And what are some thoughts that you have?
I was telling Esther there's a concrete bench downtown that says enough is a little bit, it's just a little bit more.
Yeah,
You've seen that bench?
I have. That seems to be a popular slogan, you know, that we tend to unconsciously live by that, I guess. Or well, it's interesting with this video too. It's like maybe something that often is unconscious, but asking for the sake of discipleship, of being followers of Jesus who are called to care for the earth, can we make conscious choices about what enough looks like, what that really means?
I'm kind of struggling with the issue of what's the difference between a want and a need.
Yeah, it was interesting. They were sort of, I don't know what the scale was that they were talking about here, but that obviously people who are living in poverty, the answer to that solution is they need more. They need sufficient food and shelter and water, and the resources that they need to be able to survive, and to be able to live. Then once those basic needs are kind of provided for, there's this inverse kind of a thing where that when you increase those kinds of things, people can live happier lives. They can live fuller lives, more balanced lives. But as we kind of keep rising and rising with that, there isn't a correlation to happiness. I guess it's the old saying of money can't buy me love.
But it can get you endorphins, right?
Yeah.
Buying things is a temporary rush.
Right, and endorphins, the interesting thing with that is that it always wears off. I mean, I guess with whatever your chosen substance is, whether it's alcohol or some other kind of drug of choice, it feels good when you're buzzed, and everything, but then your problems are still there, when you're not buzzed anymore, and it's like, well, now what do I do with that?
And also, as old things, as you have items that you consume, now consume.
Yeah. Did everybody hear that?
Pam is saying no.
You couldn't hear Pam? So he was saying that this thing of the things that you consume end up consuming you. Or I guess you could also say maybe the things that you think of yourself as owning, then kind of they dominate, and they own you. They control your actions. Did that come through okay? Okay.
Yes.
Good. Yeah, thanks for your patience as we talking about. We're grateful that we have these tools and we have the financial resources to buy them, but it's figuring out how to use them, too, and work with them. So, yeah. So where's that line, of between owning something and then that thing owning you, taking over? That's maybe a tricky question, to try to figure that out. Yeah.
I think it's age related to tell you the truth. People in my age are now faced with downsizing. I mean, they're moving and they're filling dumpsters full of stuff that isn't even donatable, and they're wondering, why did I ever need this stuff?
Storage. Or paid storage, that's one of the big building things around here, paid storage units, that we won't even part with the stuff that we won't have room for in our homes anymore.
Right.
And it seems to me like an age thing, because you at a certain point, you have a new house and you're buying things, you're acquiring, but then you reach a tipping point somehow. It's like you don't even want the things that you have anymore, and you can't give them away either. And so I think part of it is age related. Maybe that's experience too, of realizing what you really do need and what you just think you want. At one time, I read about the fact that somebody had estimated that if we took all the value of everything that we hold in storage, it would end up to be the world's 7th largest economy. So if there was a way of making that work, that would be one of the first world nations all by itself. So it speaks to a greed maybe.
In terms of the ownership thing too, I guess I'm just getting old enough now so I can start looking back and seeing things. But my mother did not have a career. She stayed at home. My dad worked, my mother didn't. Same with Ruth, but there were 6 kids in Ruth's family, and the kids shared bedrooms. They shared beds, not even just bedrooms. And we've kind of gotten to a point where now everybody has their own bedroom. We have more than one washroom in a house. That's the other thing too. They had 6 kids, 2 adults, and they only had 1 bathroom. 5 of the kids were girls, and they made it through with 1 bathroom. But I guess the point is too, now that we have all of these things, mothers are working, fathers are working, and it takes a lot to support that. And you're giving up a part of life in order to support and sustain that as well.
Right.
More fast.
And it starts going.
Right, yeah, yeah. I've
And
got
we
to,
have other things.
yeah, like I've got to do this in order to maintain this
Yeah.
lifestyle.
How do you
and
support that
I'm kind of stuck here, you know, right?
We had a fairly large house out in the country in Cedarburg where we brought up what eventually turned into 5 children. And one of the most joyful events in my life in the last 3+ years was getting rid of that house and everything that I needed in order to maintain that house. And it really was joyful when I thought about it. I still have way too much stuff. And so, but it was a joyful event, and I could speak to, I think everybody would basically feel the same way if they participated similarly.
It's interesting that in all of these examples that are coming up, I'm hearing an underlying theme of happiness and contentment or unhappiness, you know, and kind of being stuck, you know, or what do I do, you know, with all of this and not really being very free, you know, with all these things. But that's interesting to look at that, you know, and I guess they were using the word abundance, what that looks like, that, you know, this is going back a few videos, but that God gives us this world that is a world of abundance where there is enough for everyone, you know. Although that quote from Gandhi, there's not enough to supply everybody's greed. You know, it's not enough for that, but for the basic needs that we have, you know, the things and the joy, you know, the being able to enjoy life and thrive and discover things. Sometimes I find myself thinking, I don't think we've even begun to scratch the surface of what the capacity of our world really is to be able to do that. When we live in community together, you know, when we're sharing that, I don't think we even quite have the concept yet of what that really could be. And maybe in some ways, there's some other older generations that we're a lot closer to it than we are right now, and we've kind of forgotten some of the advancement that was made, you know, or some of the steps that were made by our grandparents and great grandparents. It's maybe rediscovering some of those kinds of things. What did you think of the little parable that Daryl Jodrock told about the people with they couldn't bend their arms?
I used to run a confirmation program, and we did that with the confirmants. We took sticks and tied them to their arms and put them in a room, maybe 17 kids, 17-year-olds, and had this wonderful meal and said, okay, bye.
Figure it out.
And they had to figure it out. It took a while. It took a while to figure out that, you know, they were hungry. We said, okay, we're going to have a meal. And they all came hungry. And then they had to like, yeah. And then it was a very big surprise when, oh.
Did they figure it out?
They did. It took a long time. They're like, oh, we can't eat. Oh, you know, they were 17-year-olds. What is this? Well, this is really stupid. What does this have to do with church? Blah, blah, blah. And then somebody, you know, it takes one person to start it, right? Just, and I think that's the lesson. You just see it once, like, I hand you a cookie.
It's working.
Wow, everybody gets it. Now, wouldn't that be nice if we could all get it?
Yeah.
And why is it that our imaginations, it's like we have a veil over our imaginations, kind of where we just can't think that way, you know, or it seems revolutionary, you know, to kind of think of something so simple like that, but it's like, well, no, I could never do that, you know. It's like a pall is kind of cast over our thinking.
Well, looking at the younger generation, though, I have hope. I think if that same group was all adults, maybe they'd all starve to death. But
Because I find myself thinking, as you get older, you realize that you are dependent on those around you to assist. You know, how many of you have had to feed a parent, for instance, you know, or have asked even to ask a spouse to, can you reach that for me? Because I can't get my arm up there today, you know? It's like you do.
Or have a spouse who helps you when you break your
Right, you know, that sometimes, again, it is being put in that situation of needing to ask for somebody's help.
Right.
It's hard for some people to ask for help, and it's hard for people without to ask for help. You know, if you have nothing, I don't know what that is, part of our society.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes we want to be generous and we want to give to the poor people. they don't want you to like do that publicly, like, you know what I mean? I think we want to be rewarded when we give. Let's go and give to the poor people, and we, you know, and then people feel that they're used. So I think when we do decide to share, we need to be sensitive to the people receiving, not to dehumanize them or feel bad for them, or like, do I make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
That very act of having to provide something for someone puts you in a powerful position. And it's a submissive.
Yes.
And, you know.
You're better
power
than
and
me.
Lack of power.
Right.
Yeah, that's a difficult hurdle to get past.
It becomes an aphrodisiac.
It can, yeah, very definitely. You can become addicted to it.
So you feel good by giving because it makes you
Yeah,
feel good.
that's right, on both ends.
Right.
Yeah, your reward is you feel good.
But they may not.
I remember Joe's two brothers were involved in a food pantry in Milwaukee. And, you know, they were seeing the same people coming. And they finally decided to have those people help. And it gave them ownership, and they felt much better that they could do something instead of just receiving all the time.
Right, or we'll give people, here's the package you get. And I've seen people work in food pantries, and the people say, well, I don't like Cheerios. Well, those poor people, who are they to pick? Well, why don't they have the right not to like Cheerios? You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
we're not treating people with dignity. We're being generous, and they should accept our generosity, and we're not giving them humanity to say, pick what you want. Do you want a cereal? Which kind would you like? What kind of bread do you want? Instead of saying, oh, well, they're poor, they'll take anything. Who do you think you are? That whole power thing, that like.
That's an interesting thing too, of starting to put categories in, you know, kind of, so I'm here, but you're there, you know, and it leads us down a difficult path. And I think one of the pieces I've appreciated in this series is looking at community, you know, the sense of the earth is a great teacher for us about interdependence and community, where we all are part of this, but we live our lives in a very distanced way from that. And it seems like we're getting further and further away from that. It's sobering to look at those statistics too, about how rapidly our population is growing. It's exponentially, yeah. And so you know, that puts pressure on our world, but it's an opportunity, I think, as well, to discover community, you know, and the power of that as well.
Should we check if anybody online?
Yeah. Yeah. Any hands or comments there of things you'd like to share? Just unmute, and I think we'll be able to hear you with this speaker here.
Michael.
Yeah, Mike, did you want to add something?
You're muted. You're muted, Mike.
No, nothing in particular. No.
Okay. Sorry,
Judy, I think Judy's looking for that.
Yeah, Judy.
I just want to check if other people heard the same thing I did, or if I got it wrong, because it's so shocking. In the video, every 20 minutes, we lose a plant or animal to extinction. Is that what
Yeah,
you
you
all heard?
Yeah, we heard that.
You heard that correctly. Yeah.
I had not heard that figure. It's just horrible.
Yeah. So I've heard ecologists kind of refer to, you know, the people who are measuring these things are looking at it, that we're living right now in a period known as the Great Extinction.
Yeah.
You know, and so in some cases, it's not the things that we see every day, like squirrels or, you know, hawks or, you know, the animals that we're kind of familiar with, but maybe plants and creatures that we don't see as much, you know, or that aren't as visible, but they're vanishing, you know, they're disappearing. And then in a lot of cases, that's because the habitat that they depend on, you know, that they live on is plowed over and built on or whatever, and it's just not there anymore. So there's no food, you know, for whatever they need to survive. They're disappearing.
I would also be curious, since Joel lives in a different part of the world from us. What in different parts of the world, what is the perspective is our US perspective unique or different, or what are the conversations in other parts?
I think, well, I live in England.
Right.
So, and you might be aware that there was a recent
Right.
COP26, so that all the great and the good got together in Glasgow and like to figure out how they're going to fix global warming. I would say that the
Speak up.
okay, talk louder.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I would say that generally speaking, the people, the people that I know in Europe and in the UK are much more worried than generally our feeling is that exists in America. There is by 2030 in the UK, you will not be able to buy a car that runs on gasoline. They have to be electric, zero emission, or at least hybrid. And that's at the government level. And every day, the front page of the news is discussion about reduction in emissions across, you know, there's not been a debate in the UK for a long time about whether, you know, climate change is a problem. There's been an acknowledgement there for many years that it is a problem to do something. And I think there's a view amongst people there that America is lagging behind the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But the statistics don't prove that out.
So that is the perception.
What did you say?
Still got space.
I didn't say anything. Oh, somebody did. Oh. Okay.
So there's a statement that was made in the video asking us to reflect on. Christians believe that the material world is good and that God provides what we need through the activity of the larger community, including the non-human community. Humans have created a new religion that is a distortion of this reality. It's called consumerism, consumption as human culture. It makes the wheels of our economy turn, but at what cost? At what point must we reassess what we need versus what we want? We've made an idol out of consuming. Any thoughts about that statement?
Yeah.
So an idol, that's an interesting phrase where that's a very biblical image where we worship something that of our creation as opposed to worshiping God who created the world. And so we become enamored with something that we've made. It isn't, I think it's a misunderstanding to the image of just forming like a statue, or something like that. I'm going to bow down to the statue, but it is whatever we've constructed, or kind of put together.
We've changed the church though. We used to worship at malls. Now we worship at Costco and Amazon.
Right. Yeah.
I think what's distressing to me about it is that what we're increasingly encouraged to consume is our disposables, that buy more and more and more of stuff that you can get rid of, that like fashion, for instance, is like, you don't want to wear anything more than one season. You don't buy something that's going to last long. You're encouraged to keep up with the ever-changing trends, and there's no aftermarket for the things that you no longer want. And to me, it's not that you can't, that clearly we do have to consume some things to keep the economy going, but we're encouraged to overconsume, to overpurchase, as a way of keeping the ever-growing economy going. So it's not like we're encouraging people to buy better built goods. It's just to be, to buy a refrigerator and know it's in 7 years, it's going to be gone.
Right. It's interesting to reflect too that this is the situation we're in, and no one's going to wave a magic wand and suddenly it's not going to be there anymore, or we're all going to live on the land, or something like that. we live the way that we live, but how can we use our ingenuity to live in a more balanced way, you know, in a more faithful way. I like at the end of the video, it was looking at this case study of Lake Park Lutheran Church, of some of the ways that they had some creative conversations together. Some of you may have even visited Alice's Garden, and you know Venus Williams, and it's an amazing place to go to, amazing ministry. You know, so some creativity of what was a brown field in Milwaukee that becomes an urban farm, you know, and it becomes something else. So I feel like that's an area, it's been quite a few years since this video came out, but we're moving away from sort of the scolding notion, you know, like, well, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. Well, this is what it is, you know, but how can we work together to kind of be creative, you know, and find ways of living more sustainably, you know, in our world. I was really intrigued, and I don't know, Joel, if you would want to share anything. We had lunch, Elisa and I had lunch with Joel and Wayne, and Joel was sharing a little bit about one of his business ventures that he's part of with looking at carbon offsets, you know, and Joel works with investments, you know, and has been quite successful with that, you know, but.
So I'm going to have to leave very shortly.
Okay.
A friend who I haven't seen in 2 years is coming to get me, but I will share briefly. So I work with a company called Respira International. And it's involved in carbon offsets. So carbon offsets are have been around for a number of years, and these are voluntary, which basically means that projects around the world, many of which are what we call nature-based. So that might be replanting trees, reducing you know, rainforest degradation, protecting peatlands, improve grazing practices in grasslands. These projects that wouldn't otherwise exist are financed through the sale of a carbon offset. And there's a price per ton of carbon dioxide emitted to the atmosphere. And these projects are then validated and verified to determine how much carbon dioxide they remove from the atmosphere each year. So the price per ton of carbon dioxide for these projects varies, but it's around $7 a ton. And so to put that in perspective, if you flew one plane, like a jumbo jet between Chicago and London a year, that produces something, you know, it's about 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide. So that is a growing, and a lot of this discussion that was going on in Glasgow was about how that works and how important that is, because a lot of times if people are migrating to less emitting technologies, that will take a long time. We're not going to fly in planes that don't burn jet fuel for decades. So are there things and airlines are big buyers of these things. So it's quite interesting. You can look on it, respira-international.com.
That's a great elevator speech, Joel.
Yeah. So anyway, it's very interesting. Lots of projects, mostly in the global south, a lot in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia. So anyway, so I must leave.
Yeah.
Thank you for
sharing that.
Good luck.
Safe travels.
Okay.
Thank you, Joel. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and with Joel's exit, we're about to the end of our hour here as well. But one thing I wanted to just kind of close us off on, this is Luther's explanation of the first article to the creed. So those of you who grew up Lutheran and had to memorize the catechism, anybody here had to memorize okay, very good. So you may recognize these words. He writes, I believe that God has created me together with all that exists. God has given me and still preserves my body and soul, eyes, ears, and all limbs and senses, reason and all mental faculties. In addition, God daily and abundantly provides shoes and clothing, food and drink, house and farm, spouse and children, fields, livestock, and all property, along with all the necessities and nourishment for this body and life. God protects me against all danger and shields and preserves me from all evil. And all this is done out of pure parental and divine goodness and mercy, without any merit or worthiness of mine at all. For all this, I am obliged to thank and praise, serve and obey God. This is most certainly true. So I think there's a wonderful image there. This is from 500 years ago, with Luther. But what an image of gratitude, recognizing where all of this comes from, that I need to live every day, and the response that we can share, and the opportunity of what goes into this to say, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. And Tom Golding and I were even talking about, of all things seen and unseen, or visible and invisible, even the things we can't see, the things we can't touch or perceive. It's this amazing mystery of what has been given and how we can live in response to that. I don't think we really have a whole lot of time to kind of go over this, but maybe just a question for all of us to think about as we depart. God provides for the abundant life of all of creation. Our earthbound vocation is to care for the earth as creatures within a web of relationships between the human and material world, land, animals, and people. At the end of this study, in light of all you've encountered, how have you been encouraged to use your gifts and talents to be inventive, creative, and even playful to live out your earthbound vocation? So that's maybe a question to leave with, and just carry with you. And it was great having more time to sit with Joel at lunch and hear about this project that he's working on. But I'm inspired by that, and by many kind of creative efforts to how we can live out that vocation as God's people. All right. Anything to add? Everybody joining us on Zoom? Okay, very good.
Before they leave, I would like to just have everybody go around, just say hello or something. I want to hear how many, if they can hear everybody wherever we are.
Oh, so yeah, could you give a thumbs up?
All right.
So give us a thumbs up. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. This
Say
is
your name
Diane.
so they can- Yeah, feedback.
Hello.
Hi, Judy.
Hi. You know what was different this time? Joyce, we've been looking at a beautiful portrait of you the whole time.
Yeah, I need to turn this so you can see other people.
Oh. No, it was delightful. It just was different.
Hello.
Terry, say a few words.
A few words. This is Terry.
You can't
see it.
Yeah, I'm off screen, I guess.
And Tom, say a few words.
I said something.
He did, and I think they could hear.
Yeah.
Hello, Judy.
I'm
Hi.
curious.
For Laverne, I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Say a few words.
Did you hear Laverne?
Yes.
Laverne.
Yes.
Good.
Mike works good.
Oh, yeah, she's way back there. Yeah.
And they said they could hear Joel before I checked with.
Yes, and the whole thing from the people in attendance, it was better today. We could hear everyone.
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you, progress.
Thanks to Dan for buying.
Thank you for helping us test that out.
Yeah, 3 more years, we'll have this down.
Yes.
Right.
I'm not making any promises.
It's a challenge.
Yeah, right.
Good. Well, great. That was nice to test this out, and glad to hear that it was working. And we'll probably be doing more of these hybrid kinds of things with some video kind of things followed by discussion. So our education team has been looking into some options for that. But thanks for participating, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep.
Very worth it.
Thanksgiving.
Yep. And
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
Good to have you as a part of it.
Don't eat too much turkey.
That's my problem.